Kris and Cody back from a conference we just got back from, huh?
Fresh.
I mean, when I say the word conference, what comes up for you?
Show up somewhere, get some information, you network with some people, a little rah-rah, maybe go out to dinner a couple times and then come home.
Okay. And so that kind of keeps you motivated for a little bit, and then what?
Well, that's the question, right? Then what? What's the new action?
There's, I think me and you, and really looking back at our career, our short career, it was you that got me into real estate and into the power of learning and knowledge. And so that's what my takeaway from this conference was, just the power in network and knowledge.
Yeah. Well, I an orientation that I thought was different, and at the conference, I say conference, but Greg spoke that it's kind of workshopy, where we were working to produce an outcome, and I thought that we fulfilled just that. Meaning, we now have a new way of orienting and thinking about what are we doing for the sake of what. That was kind of one of my takeaways, is that we applied some new thinking, but also with the structures that we have in place to help now produce real action rather than the motivational stuff like, that's all, man, let's go, and this is fun. And I get home and I'm like, what do I do?
Yeah.
I don't remember what to do here. So,
and I think we've been to enough conferences to know the difference between a common conference versus maybe like an AJI conference, which is the one that we just got back from. And I want to backtrack. I said the word power earlier. And when I say the power of a knowledge and network, it's not like power as in the force or the physical strength. It's the capacity. I mean, we're in business, like, an athlete trains to develop their skills with their body and their strength. That's power. Yeah. What about business owners?
Yeah, it's like there's a great line that Greg said. It's like fish swim, birds fly, humans speak. And when we are doing business, we're making offers, and they're all spoken. And so the idea around that is, you might want to know what a narrative is. What is a business narrative? Why is that important? And why that is important is, without that, it's a high concept idea, right? There's no real structure or properties put to this language that you're speaking.
So there's no action.
And how could we organize action around it? We don't know the components. And so that was part of my takeaway from the conference, is like, little light backtrack is the conference, there was an idea called Thinking Big that was introduced, and we've all heard of the Thinking Big idea, but what was different for me this time than all the other times I've heard it is we have real structures, which is the business narrative, aka Plot Mountain, and we also have the strategy that we can use, and you're thinking around a network of people that have either produced accomplishments, we're all in there and have produce something of value to then we can think with each other to say, okay, if my Thinking Big idea is producing whatever it is, can you help me put structures to that? And that's to me where I notice, like, the workshop, where it's like in those breakout groups, we put real properties to some of the thinking in the form of maybe a project or maybe just your intentions for the year. That was very valuable to me.
Yeah, I like what Greg did with the notion of thinking big, like the principle behind it.
Yeah.
Because if let's say you did $1 million last year in revenue, and next year you wanted to say do $1.5 million, is that really thinking big, or is that just getting marginally better and doing just a little bit more?
Yeah.
And I think the notion there of thinking big is how to go from 1 to 10, 1 to 5 even.
Yeah.
Because what that does is it changes the way that you operate. It has to. The networks you're involved in, the practices that you do daily, all that has to change.
Yeah.
If you're just going from 1 to 1.5, there's not much change there.
Yeah. Yeah. We went over a little bit of it about your nervous system and managing your psychology, because we did familiarity, understanding, and knowledge. There was like a little section there. And the reason why that stood out to me is when you're thinking big, your psychology can then get in the way of how do I not go to like despair or something psychological around it, because I don't know how to do that, and I'm just presented with so many conflicts now that I don't know how to resolve any of them. And so that can produce a breakdown of, well, what's the point, right? And so there was like this idea of sitting with that and allowing that uncomfortable psychology to be produced. But what it's doing is it's triggering your nervous system to say, okay, we don't know how to resolve any of these conflicts. Let's be with that. That's okay. Like we're speculating. We're creating a space where it's okay to think like that, rather than every single day you have no idea how to solve any of your conflicts. That's different. So this was like almost like a safe space for to think.
Yeah.
So what I noticed in that was, okay, if I can now allow my nervous system to be okay with this thinking big, I can then decide, okay, how do I want to proceed here with my network? With what real structures do I have, like the business narrative? Because when I can ground that in what is my resolution or my ambition, that really helps. So I'll give you an example. In the thinking big idea, my constitution for the year is $260K income. Okay, so in thinking big, I don't necessarily need to make that $1 million, but what I do, where my thoughts went, is how do I design making $260K, but also producing a new space for capital at work to fulfill my financial ambition, which I went from 25 to 45. So how can I do the 260K while building to that, which is what we're talking about, the designing the cash now in our structure, plus the capability of producing the capital at work. Because like for me to live is not, it costs me like $68,000 a year. But the additional is to make investments, to have reserves, to do these things. And so that's where my design and my thinking is shifting around, feeling so like I need to do one-off houses versus how can we think bigger with our network. Because I think a common challenge we've run into is we've got the network, we just never presented them an offer.
Yeah.
So
and we've never produced ourselves to become a market for that network.
Yeah.
Partly because we're caught up in the day-to-day, and that's part of Ozzy's philosophy too, is we're too busy to learn. And you said, I want to go back, you said conflicts. What I took away was inventing conflicts. Well, whenever you constitute that you want this next ambition or this next intention, that's automatically you're producing a conflict as to why can't you? Why can't you make $5 million this year? Right. What's holding you back?
Yeah, the autonomy. Yeah. Yeah, that's producing. I like that. Like creating the conflict. So back to the structure, right? It's like the thinking big idea, and then going into the structure of what is. So yeah, I constituted an ambition. That's a high concept, or this thinking big concept. But every business narrative has exposition, conflict, rising action, resolution, denouement. And we can use our resolution to say, this is what we want at the end of the year. And then what is our conflicts that are stopping us, to your point. And then we can invent what those are because of our background or our networks that we're working with. And that's a different orientation than I had thought about in the past, because it was very high concept. Let's hire 100 sales guys by the end of the year.
When we had none.
So, that was very useful for me.
Yeah, the think big is a push towards thinking differently too.
Yeah.
And so that shows up for me as in the current configuration I'm a part of. I would have to, I don't know. It would mean I would have to change what I'm doing to get to where I want to be. And is that satisfactory enough, worth pursuing, or do I need to reconstitute?
Yeah.
And there's power in constitution.
Something that I've been working is, okay, so if my intention is to produce an income of, let's say, $1 million plus, is what I'm currently doing a vehicle that is capable of producing that? Perhaps.
It's capable.
It's capable.
Mm-hmm.
Are there different ways that open up different possibilities and opportunities that can also produce that, but maybe produce more utility for me, more freedom and autonomy for me, because I'm a freedom seeker.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's where I go. Like earlier we were talking, would it be useful to talk about one house or 100 units?
Yeah.
And that kind of thinking, at the end of the day, we all have 24 hours to think and act. We all have just enough energy to expense every day. That's your biology. Like, we have capacities.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're thinking small, you're using the same capacity as someone who's thinking big.
The same.
Mm-hmm. You're human.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's how the discrepancy of like the Jeff Bezos versus someone who, works at a telemarketing center.
Mm-hmm.
They both have 24 hours, but it's their level of thinking. And when you produce real structures around that thinking, you begin to produce like an opportunity to fulfill that, right? It's like Jeff Bezos didn't get where he is by thinking about the call center calls.
Mm-hmm.
He got there by thinking big and then putting real structures to that and designing around it and all that. And we see Amazon now, but keep in mind, Amazon was worth $1 billion around 2000.
Mm-hmm.
So his company's been valued at $1 billion for a while. So it's like, while we're using him as an example, let's not skip over the fact that he had to build up to that. And he still had to think big, but he had new tools and technology to use in new networks that he increased the thinking. And so in my reflection from this weekend or this week is, how do we think bigger with our capabilities? Because my speculation is we're growing in our capability, and network. So how do we exploit that?
Where my thoughts go on that is, if I step outside of my body and step into somebody who maybe is in a W-2 and are looking to become more free or earn more, my mind goes to their thinking. Well, how am I going to do it? And I think what happens is most people will get stuck on the how, and stops them right there.
Yeah.
But we're testaments of that. We were once at a conference. How is that person doing it? He's on stage speaking about it.
Yeah.
If he can do it, why can't I? What am I missing?
Right.
And so going back to the thinking big, the opposite of that, thinking small, Greg mentioned it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Man. And so what I take from that is it's a way to feel good about yourself because you did it, and you can keep doing it and keep doing it, but ultimately it's thwarting your ultimate intention to get the freedom that you seek, or the autonomy or the income you need.
Wow.
And, in my entrepreneurship coming up, so to speak, I'd had friends say, hey, it's not all about the money. Well, why are you working then?
Yeah.
It's about some money. Now, existentially, no, it's not. But we're using that as a way to provide for our families, take care of our concerns in a way that's different than showing up at a desk from 8 to 5, 40 hours a week.
Right.
And that's the true freedom, is having that schedule that you get to call, because you might want to work and be the operator in your business, or you might want to be a passive investor.
Right. That's really good, man. Yeah, the self-fulfilling prophecy. I like the distinction there of the feel good. It's almost like I know what I'm capable of and I know what I can do. So let me do that to feel good about it rather than being uncomfortable with the idea of fulfilling an ambition, especially when you're taking care of people. It's like we want to live a good life, but are we willing to go through what it requires to live a good life? There was something that came up for me when we were at the conference was the idea of the man in the arena. That was a Theodore Roosevelt quote, but the idea is that there is a spectator and then there's a man in the arena. The man in the arena isn't he's not all dressed nice and he's like bloody, battered, but he's alive and he won. It's like you're not going to be you're going to have scars along the way, so to speak. Like it's not going to be easy, perfect, always in good moods. It's like, no. The real work is how do you manage the downside? How do you manage the bad moods about being bloodied and battered and hurt and all this, but still being able to push through and fulfill. And it's not easy. It's also not obvious. And an example of how to mitigate the bloody, battered, and beaten part is having a structure to put your high concept thinking in. So I'm using this metaphor of the man in the arena to back to business and the high concept. How do you put real properties to it so you're not the spectator in the stands, that you are the person in the arena? And you do that by putting those properties to your thinking or to your ambitions. And then it's the pursuit of that now.
The journey.
How do we, and they said at the conference, like, we're not a destination, philosophy. It's a journey. It's the becoming. And I think we maybe don't give ourselves enough credit for just how far we've come, how much we've learned, how much we continue to learn, and just how almost rigorous, so to speak, it is to just learn all the time.
I think we get caught up in the current situation where we're at currently, just in the short horizon of thinking, versus being able to reflect back and see in just the 5 years we've been doing this, what would the next 5 years look like? I would imagine, speculate, it would be a lot shorter and a lot quicker to our outcomes than the first 5, because of the knowledge and the network. And that's something, those two words right there are words that I carry fundamentally with me all the time. How can I increase my network or my knowledge? One of the two or both. And so with that, I'm able to travel with and identify certain locations. Like when the lady called me talking about something else, I knew that I was a market for her offer of lending money. That's a network, but I'm looking for it at all times, not just answering a phone call to talk about the other guy. How do I improve your situation?
Right. Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, the knowledge network. This last year, our focus in in AJI was around offers, and then this year is about leadership. And I thought Greg did such a genius level job of designing the conference. The Think Big concept is amazing because it now produces a space to use the narrative and the offer and producing offers, and we have to lead other people. Because people don't often they don't know the story. You have to tell them the narrative in your offer. They don't hold that, so it's up to you to produce that.
You can bring forth a different interpretation. There's other ways of looking at it. And in a linguistic framework, which is the world we live in, by the way, I mean, that chair you're sitting on, it's only considered a chair because that's what we call it.
We've given it language, we've given it structure and organization, and that's
what it is.
So, but in that, what stood out to me is he's setting us up for the entire year to be around leadership. And leadership is all in the language, it's in the narrative we speak. And so if we're thinking big, how do we orient our people around that? Or how do we orient the offers that we're making to people? Because ultimately, it's like, it is kind of like a leadership offer. Especially if you have a team that you run and manage, and you're bringing them in to your thinking. You're the leader there. So, yeah, it's very valuable.
Man, and it doesn't take much to go to these conferences and realize the power in the strategic knowledge that we're gaining. You know, they often claim you can't be too busy to learn, and part of my problem is I'm too busy to produce and build, so I think.
Yeah.
And that's the conflict. And being in the linguistic space, we invent that. You can't just go to the store and purchase a conflict.
Or a resolution.
It's you as the speaker that creates that, constitutes it, brings it forward. Because when you can bring it forward, that produces the space, like you were saying, to act with it, think with it, perform with it. And now you're in this that you created.
Yeah.
As a speaker. Right.
So it's like, be careful what you craft, because that's what you're bringing forth to work in. And so if your craft and your narrative is, poor me, thinking small, this, that, your language is going to stay there until you're perturbed in a way that shifts that. So with us knowing language and knowing that we're linguistic and we have fundamentals that we orient around, the more we learn strategic knowledge, the more we can design intentionally and think like, the best orientation is around ambition. So it's like, you could do the incremental growth year over year. That's fine if that fulfills your ambition. But if it doesn't, we might want to change our orientation. Otherwise, you're going to think small for so long that you're going to fail to fulfill your ultimate purpose. And so what is that ultimate ambition and purpose? And then we orient around that, kind of like reverse engineer. And the cool part is the journey of dealing with the conflict is accumulating knowledge and networks, right? It's like, great. Wow, we have 72 new conflicts. Perfect. What knowledge do we need to gain? Who do we know that has that knowledge? How do we make them an offer? Yeah. And it gives you a place to put real properties too.
I was going to say kind of what Kurt brought up is that knowledge can be brokered. It could be borrowed. It could be bought.
Yeah.
Meaning I could pay for you to consult me here. Right. I could partner with you. And so for those who are like stuck on the how, it's I think that the bigger thing is who. Who, not how.
Right.
So I often go because we're kind of starting over, so to speak, at the next level.
Yeah.
On level 1.
Yep.
And so I often put myself in just starting out, and for me that's always been the hardest part to overcome. Once you get going, you produce those accomplishments. You now have that identity to produce more of them.
Yeah, it drops your cost.
And the know-how too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's like, yeah, we're starting over, but we have gained so much, and we have the support, we have the knowledge, we have the networks. Now it's just up to us to constitute and to act with ethics to fulfill on this new constitution. So like my focuses for the year is constitution, ethics, and offers. So how do I bring forth like what we're doing here, this thinking, so then we can put ethics around that? How do we behave with that to fulfill on what we say we're going to do, and to make these offers and actually have the space on the behind, like the back end of the offer, to fulfill and satisfy whoever we're making offers to. And that requires to a degree like a consistent speculation, consistent action, and just learning. So that's
Ty Lopez, I saw the other day, made a comment about you're one relationship away. And for me in my company last year, I saw how true that is, of adding a certain lender and a buyer. And with that, as a deal sourcer, somebody who sources deals, I can pair the two together. And so, it shows me, you talked about part of your ambition this year is to work on ambition, ethics, and offers. Right after offers is networks.
Yep. And
so I go to, well, who am I missing? But then I go, well, I've got people in there. So what am I missing? It's the offer.
Yeah. Oh, and I think too, it's like, so in each part of the strategy is the strategy. So for example, just to highlight like the constitution pieces, like we're thinking and we're constituting. So I'm in a way like you're my network that I'm working with to constitute. And it's same thing with the ethics, same thing with the offers. And so, I'll make a slight pivot, but because it's around offers. Offers is a conditional promise that we make to others, but also we're requesting something. So we're promising something, but we're also requesting something in return. Do we know what our network's concerns are?
Or their ambitions,
What do they need help with? And so in that, like in a way, we share a similar conflict, which is why the exchange is mutual, and it's like we're both a market for that. But that's because we've talked. We know, like we to a degree know what our conflicts are. But do we know what all of our network's conflict is? Not really. Not until we ask and have that conversation. So I'd say that's kind of like as part of the ethics for offers is how do I, and then my constitution, how do I constitute a story about discovering more about what you care about? What are your challenges that you're facing? And how do I bring that out to say, oh, I don't have the ethics to fulfill that, but Cody does, and I can then design and make offers in that way. So,
yeah, I recall one time back when we were out in the LA Times early on. You're like, we're talking to Dave, and you made a comment. I said, we need to focus on what we need to get, not what Dave wants. And in that thinking, I'm like, well, if I can serve what he wants, and that's our opportunity. And so getting back to that level of thinking of serving others.
Yeah, it's like the help you receive is only as good as the help you can give. And we have to be really good at giving help and also noticing where help is needed.
Do you remember that, by the way?
Yeah. I think we had two challenges in the beginning. I thought one was I couldn't get out of the high concept. I was so stuck in that. And then what I noticed was a lot of your orientation was around what can I get rather than what do we give.
Yeah.
And so that was, we pair that, and we don't really know until we're exposed to our breakdowns. Like, oh, okay, got it. Like we got really good at giving help to homeowners.
Yeah. And that was a change. That was like the difference.
Yeah.
It was coming from a place of service and value. And, you use the word orientation a lot. That in itself is an orientation to work with and move with, is how do I contribute and become of service to people.
Yeah. And
selfishly, altruistically, that in turn helps you out too.
It's an exchange. Yeah. So, I think it'd be a good spot to maybe conclude.
Yeah.
As we've thought big, we have put some real structures to it, and now it's just the evolution of inventing conflicts and noticing how can we resolve them, not only for ourselves but also for our networks.
Yeah,
I think that'd be a good way to sum up
all right
our convo.
That's a KC.
Peace.